It was supposed to be a routine flight, just another trip through the skies. But when a passenger suffered a medical emergency, and a respected doctor stepped up to save his life, everything took a shocking turn. The flight crew ignored him. The captain called him a disturbance. And when the plane landed, it wasn't the sick passenger they were waiting for, it was him. What started as one act of discrimination unraveled into something much bigger: a corporate cover-up, years of hidden injustices, and a desperate attempt to silence the truth. But when the people in power tried to bury the story, they made one fatal mistake. They underestimated those who refused to stay quiet. This is the story of Flight 387, the scandal that shook the airline industry, and the people who risked everything to bring the truth to light. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. And if you love gripping, real-world stories like this, make sure to subscribe, because the truth is always worth uncovering. Dr. Malcolm Grant adjusted his seatbelt and leaned back, trying to relax. The flight from New York to Los Angeles was supposed to be uneventful, a simple journey before his upcoming medical conference. He had traveled extensively, spoken at countless events, and saved lives in the most unexpected places. But never had he imagined that the next life he would save would be at 30,000 feet in the air. Seated in first class, he barely noticed the businessman across the aisle until the man groaned and clutched his chest. His face turned pale, and sweat beaded on his forehead. A flight attendant rushed over as whispers spread through the cabin. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice. The man tried to respond, but only a wheezing sound escaped. Grant unbuckled his seatbelt and stood. "I am a doctor. He is having a heart attack. He needs immediate medical attention." A flight attendant hesitated before glancing toward the cockpit. Then she did something unexpected. "Is there a doctor on board?" she called out, completely ignoring Grant. Grant blinked, momentarily stunned. "I just told you I am a doctor," he repeated, louder this time. Another passenger, a middle-aged white man, raised his hand. "I took a first aid course a few years ago," he said hesitantly. "Please help him," the flight attendant urged, ushering the man forward. Grant clenched his jaw. This was absurd. "He needs medical expertise, not first aid," he said, stepping closer. The patient gasped, his breath growing shallower. Grant reached into his carry-on, pulling out a portable medical kit. He had no time for arguments. Then the intercom crackled. "This is Captain Jackson. Please return to your seats. Our crew will handle the situation." Grant frowned. The patient did not have time for bureaucracy. He dropped to his knees beside the man, checking his pulse. It was weak. "He needs nitroglycerin and oxygen now." Lisa, a younger flight attendant, hesitated before bending down. "I will get it." Before she could move, another attendant grabbed her arm. "Captain's orders. Stay back." Grant looked up sharply. "Orders? This is a medical emergency." The patient gasped again, his fingers trembling. Grant could see the fear in his eyes. Lisa shook off her colleague's grip and ran toward the emergency medical kit. But the moment she handed it to Grant, the intercom sounded again. "This is your captain speaking. Due to a passenger disturbance, we will be making an emergency landing." The words sent a ripple of shock through the cabin. "Disturbance?" Grant repeated. Then he realized. The captain was talking about him, and the nightmare was only beginning. The moment the captain's voice faded from the intercom, the cabin erupted into murmurs of confusion. Passengers glanced between each other, their faces tight with concern. Some reached for their phones, while others looked toward the struggling businessman, who was now barely conscious. Dr. Malcolm Grant remained kneeling beside the man, his mind racing. Emergency landing? Because of a disturbance? He had encountered bureaucracy in hospitals, but never had he seen it weaponized in the middle of a life-or-death crisis. Lisa, the only flight attendant who had dared to help, looked pale. "Dr. Grant, what do we do?" Grant was already working. He placed a nitroglycerin tablet under the patient's tongue and checked his vitals again. The man's pulse was erratic. He needed oxygen, but every second wasted brought him closer to cardiac arrest. A flight attendant standing nearby reached for the medical kit. "Sir, I have to take that back," she said, her voice forced and professional. Grant shot her a sharp look. "Are you serious? This man could die." "It's the captain's orders." The word sent a chill through him. Before he could argue, the businessman let out a weak groan. His fingers twitched as if trying to grasp at something invisible. His breathing slowed. "Move!" Grant snapped, pushing past the flight attendant. He reached for the oxygen mask and placed it over the patient's face. "Breathe. That's it, stay with me." Passengers were no longer whispering. Many were now recording. Someone muttered, "This is insane," while another asked, "Why is he being stopped?" Then, a sharp voice cut through the chaos. "Sir, step away from the passenger." Grant looked up. A flight attendant with a rigid posture and a headset stared him down. She was one of the senior crew members. "I will not," Grant said firmly. "Unless you want a dead body on your flight, I suggest you let me do my job." The flight attendant pursed her lips but said nothing. Then the plane jolted. The seatbelt sign flickered on. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking," the intercom crackled. "We are making an unscheduled landing at Denver International Airport. Please remain in your seats." Passengers gasped. Denver was still hundreds of miles away. Lisa leaned toward Grant. "They are landing because of you." Grant stiffened. He knew what was happening. He was being labeled as a threat, an uncooperative passenger. And once they landed, airport security would be waiting. But he could not care about that now. The businessman's eyes fluttered open briefly before rolling back. His breathing was shallow. "We need to get him lying flat," Grant ordered. "Lisa, help me." The young flight attendant hesitated, then nodded. Together, they adjusted the seat, carefully lowering the man to improve blood flow. The senior flight attendant stepped forward again. "Doctor, you are disregarding direct orders from the captain." Grant didn't even look up. "Your captain's orders are killing him." Passengers were recording everything. A woman called out, "Why are they stopping him?" A man added, "If that was my dad, I'd sue this airline." But then, something unexpected happened. A voice rang out from the back of the plane. "I am a lawyer," a woman announced, standing up. "And I suggest the crew think carefully before stopping a licensed doctor from saving a passenger's life. Because if this man dies, this becomes a criminal case." The tension in the air became suffocating. The senior flight attendant faltered. Lisa whispered, "Keep going, doctor." Grant did not need to be told twice. But as the plane began its descent, he realized something chilling. The real fight would not begin until they landed. As the plane descends, cameras are rolling, passengers are furious, and Dr. Grant is running out of time. But what will happen when the wheels touch the ground? Will the airline cover up the truth, or will justice finally take flight? The plane jolted as it touched down at Denver International Airport. The tension in the cabin was thick, an uneasy silence settling over the passengers. The businessman lay still, his breathing shallow but steady under Dr. Malcolm Grant's care. Lisa, the only flight attendant who had dared to help, hovered close by, her hands trembling. Outside, flashing blue and red lights streaked across the tarmac. Several airport security officers stood in formation near the jet bridge, their postures stiff and prepared. Passengers murmured nervously. "They're here for him," someone whispered. Grant exhaled, his jaw tightening. He had spent his career saving lives, not defending himself against absurd accusations. The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated while authorities handle an onboard situation." The businessman stirred weakly. Grant turned to Lisa. "We need to get him to the paramedics immediately." Lisa nodded, but looked helpless. They told us to wait." Grant's patience snapped. "Wait for what?" A funeral? He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood, ignoring the disapproving glare from the senior flight attendant. The doors opened. Two uniformed officers stepped inside, their expressions unreadable. Behind them, a man in a dark suit and airline official walked, with controlled precision. "Dr. Grant?" one officer asked. Grant met his gaze. "This man is having a medical emergency. He needs help now." The businessman let out a weak groan, as if in agreement. The officer hesitated. He glanced at the senior flight attendant, who quickly stepped forward. "This passenger refused to comply with crew orders," she stated firmly. "He created a disturbance during the flight." Passengers erupted in protest. "That's a lie," someone shouted. "He was saving a life," another added. The lawyer from earlier, tall, confident, with a piercing gaze, stood up. "I have video proof that the doctor was doing his duty while your crew obstructed him. I suggest you reconsider your next move." The officer hesitated. The airline official's face twitched. Then another voice cut through the chaos. "I want to speak," the businessman rasped. The entire cabin stilled. The officer stepped closer. "Sir, can you confirm what happened?" The businessman took a shaky breath, then pointed at Grant. "This man saved my life. If you arrest him, I will sue this airline for everything it's worth." A heavy silence followed. The airline official's face paled. Lisa, still gripping the seat in front of her, let out a relieved breath. Passengers exchanged looks, some grinning, others still recording. The officer turned back to Grant. "Doctor, thank you for your service. Paramedics are on their way." Grant's shoulders eased slightly. Finally. But the airline official was not done. "This is still a violation of protocol," he said stiffly. "There will be an internal review." Grant folded his arms. "Good. And while you're reviewing, consider how your captain endangered a life today." The man's lips pressed into a thin line, but he said nothing. As paramedics rushed in, Grant stepped aside, letting them work. He felt the weight on his chest lessen, but he knew this was not over. Lisa turned to him. "They're scared," she whispered. Grant nodded. "They should be." But what would the airline do next? As Dr. Grant walks off the plane, cameras are waiting. But is the world ready for the truth? Or will the airline try to bury it before it can take off? Dr. Malcolm Grant stepped off the plane and into a wall of flashing lights and microphones. The moment he set foot in the terminal, reporters swarmed like a storm waiting to break. "Dr. Grant, can you tell us what happened on Flight 387? Is it true the airline refused to let you treat a dying passenger? Do you think race played a role in the captain's decision?" The questions fired at him like bullets, each one carrying the weight of a scandal waiting to explode. Grant squared his shoulders, keeping his face calm. This was not the place for anger. He had learned long ago that the world expected black men to react with rage, only to use it against them. Instead, he took a slow breath. "Right now, my priority is the patient. I am a doctor. I did what any doctor would do." A reporter pushed forward. "But the airline called you a disturbance. What do you say to that?" Grant met her gaze. "Saving a life is not a disturbance. Blocking a doctor from doing his job, that is." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The cameras zoomed in. Grant could already see the headlines forming. Behind him, Lisa stepped off the plane, her face pale under the airport lights. She hesitated before catching up to him. "Dr. Grant," she whispered, "the airline's PR team is already spinning this. They're saying the captain followed standard procedures." Grant clenched his jaw. Of course they were. Damage control was already in motion. As if on cue, the airport monitors flickered, switching to a live press conference. A suited spokesman for the airline stood at a podium. "We regret the unfortunate incident on Flight 387. The safety of our passengers is always our top priority. We are conducting an internal review and stand by our crew's commitment to following protocol in emergency situations." Lisa scoffed. "Protocol? Their protocol nearly killed someone." Grant exhaled through his nose. They're trying to minimize it, hoping it blows over. But it would not. Not this time. A buzz echoed from his pocket. He pulled out his phone. Messages flooded in colleagues, activists, even strangers on social media. One name stood out. Diane Walters, senior producer, Global News Network. The message was brief. Dr. Grant, we want your story. National coverage. Call me. He looked up at Lisa. This is bigger than just us now. Lisa nodded. The passengers, many of them, recorded everything. Some are already talking to reporters. The lawyer, too. Grant's mind worked quickly. The airline was trying to contain the fire. He needed to make sure it spread. Another reporter stepped forward. Dr. Grant, do you think this was racial discrimination? The question hung in the air. It was the question. The one everyone was waiting for him to answer. Grant chose his words carefully. I think the world saw what happened today. I think the airline has a lot to answer for. The cameras clicked furiously. Lisa's phone buzzed. She checked it and swallowed hard. Captain Jackson just deleted his social media accounts. Grant's brow lifted slightly. Interesting. A security guard approached. Dr. Grant, the airline has requested a private meeting with you. Grant glanced at Lisa, then at the reporters still hanging onto every word. Tell them they can meet me on national television, he said. Lisa grinned. The guard hesitated, then nodded and walked away. As Grant turned back to the cameras, he knew one thing for sure: the story was not going away. It was only getting started. The world is watching, and the airline is scrambling. But what happens when the truth becomes impossible to ignore? Will the captain speak out, or will someone else break first? Captain Eric Jackson sat in a dimly lit conference room, his hands clasped tightly together. The airline's legal team sat across from him, their faces unreadable. A large screen on the wall played news clips on a loop. Every major network was covering the Flight 387 scandal. Video footage from inside the plane showed Dr. Malcolm Grant desperately trying to save a passenger's life, while the crew actively obstructed him. Jackson clenched his jaw. This was getting out of control. The airline's head of public relations, a steely-eyed woman named Margaret Lynn, paused the video and turned to him. Captain, we need to talk about your future. His stomach twisted. My future? Margaret folded her hands neatly on the table. This story is spiraling. The media is turning Dr. Grant into a hero and you into the villain. Sponsors are pulling back, the FAA is asking questions, and the board wants someone held accountable. Jackson forced himself to keep his expression neutral. So you're throwing me under the plane? Margaret didn't flinch. You made the decision to declare Dr. Grant a disturbance. You chose to land the plane under false pretenses. That's on you. Jackson's pulse quickened. I followed protocol. A sharp voice cut in. No, you didn't. Jackson turned. A man in a dark suit, legal counsel, most likely, leaned forward. Captain, we reviewed past complaints against you. There is a pattern. You have had multiple passenger complaints regarding racial bias over the years. We ignored them. We can't ignore this one. Jackson stiffened. This is ridiculous. Margaret sighed. Let me be clear. The airline does not tolerate discrimination. She let the words hang, then added, at least not when it becomes a PR disaster. Jackson felt his world shift beneath him. So that's it. I take the fall and the airline moves on. Margaret gave him a thin smile. Unless you have another option. For the first time in his career, Captain Jackson felt powerless. Then his phone buzzed. A message flashed across the screen. Unknown number. We need to talk. I know what the airline is hiding. His grip tightened around the phone. Margaret noticed. Something wrong, Captain? Jackson forced a smirk. Not at all. Just making sure my career doesn't crash before I do. Margaret studied him for a moment before standing. Good. Then you understand what's at stake. The airline will release a statement tomorrow. You'll be on leave while we investigate. I suggest you stay quiet. Jackson watched as the team filed out, leaving him alone with his thoughts. His career, his reputation, it was all crumbling. But that message. Someone else knew something. And if they had leverage, maybe he still had a way out. He quickly typed back, "Who are you? What do you know?" A reply came almost instantly. "Meet me in an hour. I'll tell you how deep this goes." Jackson stared at the screen. He had no idea what he was walking into. But he was starting to realize this scandal was bigger than him. Much bigger. The airline wants a scapegoat, but Captain Jackson isn't going down without a fight. Who sent the message? And what secret is the airline hiding? Captain Eric Jackson pulled into a dimly lit parking lot, gripping the steering wheel tighter than he should have. His mind raced with possibilities. The message he received earlier had been cryptic, but it was clear. Someone had information, and they wanted to meet. He stepped out of his car, scanning the nearly empty lot. A few flickering streetlights cast long shadows, and the distant hum of traffic was the only sound. Then, from the darkness, a figure emerged. "Captain Jackson." The voice was low, cautious. Jackson tensed. "Who's asking?" The figure stepped closer, revealing a young woman in a dark hoodie. She pulled back her hood, and recognition hit him like turbulence. "Lisa, the flight attendant from Flight 387. You?" Jackson scoffed. "You're the one who messaged me?" Lisa nodded, her expression tense. "I didn't know if you'd show up." "You said you had information," Jackson said, crossing his arms. "I don't have time for games." Lisa pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. A file loaded, a set of flight logs. She held it up for him to see. "I found this in the airline's internal system before they locked me out." Jackson frowned. "Flight logs? What am I looking at?" Lisa took a deep breath. "It's not just about Flight 387. The airline has been covering up incidents for years. Complaints about racial discrimination, emergency mismanagement, even cases where medical assistance was denied on board." Jackson's blood ran cold. She scrolled further. "Look at this. Flight 227, last year same situation. A black doctor tried to help during an emergency, and the crew ignored him. The passenger didn't make it. The airline quietly settled with the family." Jackson felt a sinking feeling in his gut. "I never heard about that." "Of course not," Lisa said. "They buried it. And there's more. Look at this flight 2 years ago. A woman reported the captain refused to divert for a medical emergency because the passenger in distress was undocumented. The passenger died before landing. No investigation. No consequences." Jackson exhaled sharply. He had always known airlines worked hard to control their image, but this was something else entirely. Lisa met his gaze. "This isn't just about you, Captain. You were going to let them throw you under the bus to protect the company. But they don't care about you. They never did. You're just the latest problem they want to make disappear." Jackson's fingers curled into fists. The airline wasn't protecting him. They were protecting themselves. He had followed orders for years, believing he was part of something bigger. Now he saw the truth. "They are going to pin everything on me," he muttered. Lisa nodded. "Unless we get ahead of them." Jackson looked at the flight logs again. If this got out, it wouldn't just be his career on the line, it would be the entire airline. He exhaled. "What do you want me to do?" Lisa's eyes hardened. "Tell the truth. Go public. Admit what you did and expose what they've been covering up." Jackson hesitated. If he did this, there was no going back. But if he stayed silent, he would be nothing more than a disposable pawn in the airline's damage control strategy. His career was already over. Maybe it was time to take them down with him. He met Lisa's gaze. "Let's do it." Lisa exhaled in relief. "We have to move fast." Because the airline? They already know we're onto them. Somewhere in the distance, a car engine rumbled to life. Lisa and Jackson both turned, instincts on high alert. They weren't alone. The airline's secrets are out. But will Jackson and Lisa expose them before it's too late? Or will the company strike first? The low rumble of an engine sent a jolt of adrenaline through Lisa and Captain Jackson. Someone was watching. Someone who should not be there. Lisa acted first. She grabbed Jackson's arm and pulled him behind a parked SUV. We need to go. Now. Jackson peeked over the car's hood, catching a glimpse of a black sedan idling near the lot's exit. Its headlights flicked off. A bad sign. Get in my car, he said in a low voice. We can't stay here. They moved quickly. As soon as they shut the doors, Jackson pulled out of the lot, keeping his speed steady. His fingers tightened around the wheel. Who do you think they are? Lisa's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and swallowed hard. I think we just found out. She turned the phone so Jackson could see. A single message from an unknown number. You don't know what you're playing with. Drop it. Jackson's grip on the wheel tightened. Lisa exhaled sharply. They know we have the flight logs. Of course they do, Jackson muttered. This isn't some minor PR problem. If this gets out, the airline isn't just losing money, they're facing lawsuits, federal investigations maybe. Even criminal charges. Lisa ran a hand through her hair, trying to steady her nerves. So what do we do? If they're watching us, they'll try to silence us. Jackson turned onto a quieter road, his mind racing. He had spent years trusting the system, believing in rules and procedures. But this wasn't about rules anymore. This was survival, and he knew exactly who could help. He picked up his phone and dialed. Who are you calling? Lisa asked. Dr. Grant, Jackson said. Lisa's eyes widened. Are you sure? You tried to ruin him. Jackson sighed. And now I need him to help me bring down the people who gave the orders. The phone rang once, twice. Then, this is Dr. Grant. Jackson cleared his throat. Dr. Grant, it's Captain Jackson. I need to talk to you. Silence. Lisa shot Jackson a nervous look. Then, Grant's voice came back, sharp and cautious. Talk? Or cover your own ass? Jackson exhaled. Both. But I also have something you need. Proof. More silence. Then, I'm listening. Lisa quickly summarized everything: the flight logs, the hidden cases, the threats. When she finished, there was a pause before Grant spoke again. Meet me in 1 hour, he said. I want to see this for myself. Jackson nodded. Where? Grant gave him an address. Jackson recognized it immediately: an independent news station. Lisa's eyebrows shot up. He's not wasting time. Jackson smirked. Would you? They ended the call. Jackson made a sharp turn, heading toward the city. If we go public now, they can't stop us. Lisa nodded, but her expression remained uneasy. Unless they stop us first. Jackson didn't respond. He just pressed harder on the gas. Behind them, in the dark, the black sedan followed. The truth is closer to the surface, but so is danger. Will Grant, Jackson, and Lisa expose the conspiracy, or will they be silenced before they get the chance? The city lights blurred as Captain Jackson sped toward the independent news station. Lisa kept glancing at the rearview mirror, her fingers gripping the door handle. They're still behind us, she said. Jackson's jaw tightened. The black sedan had been trailing them for the last 10 miles, never getting too close, but never backing off either. Whoever was inside wanted them to know they were being followed. Lisa turned to him. Should we go somewhere else? Jackson shook his head. No. If we disappear, they win. The safest place for us right now is in front of cameras. Minutes later, they pulled up to a modest brick building with a glowing red sign. Independent News Network. Dr. Malcolm Grant was already waiting outside, standing beneath a street lamp, arms crossed. His expression was unreadable as they stepped out of the car. You got here fast, Jackson said, trying to gauge his mood. Grant's eyes flicked to the black sedan slowing down a block away. Looks like you brought company. Lisa stiffened. They've been following us since we left the parking lot. Grant exhaled. Then let's get inside before we give them a reason to act. They hurried through the glass doors. A receptionist barely looked up as Grant led them down a hallway into a small conference room. A large monitor was mounted on the wall, and a sleek laptop sat on the table. Grant turned to them. "Show me what you have." Lisa didn't hesitate. She pulled out her phone, a thumb drive, and a folder full of printed flight logs. She placed them on the table and began loading the files onto the laptop. As the documents appeared on the screen, Grant's expression hardened. "This is worse than I thought." Jackson watched as Grant scrolled through the files. Case after case of denied medical aid, ignored emergencies, passengers dying mid-flight because crew members followed protocol rather than common sense. Some of them had quietly settled. Others had been erased from the public record entirely. Lisa pointed at one. "This one? Flight 227. The same thing happened. A black doctor offered to help, and the crew ignored him. The passenger died before landing." Grant's fingers curled into fists. "And no one heard about it because the airline covered it up." Jackson spoke up. "Now you see why I called. I was a part of this system. I followed their rules. And I almost let them bury me to protect themselves." He met Grant's eyes. "I'm done protecting them." Grant studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Good. Because we're taking this public." Lisa hesitated. "Do we have enough?" Grant's lips pressed into a thin line. With Jackson speaking out, "Yes. But we need a news anchor willing to air it live. No edits. No spin." Jackson exhaled. "I know someone." He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. It rang twice before a voice answered. "This is Diane Walters." Jackson didn't waste time. "Diane, it's Captain Jackson. I have a story for you. The biggest scandal in aviation history. And I have the proof." Silence. Then, "How soon can you be in the studio?" Jackson looked at Grant and Lisa. "We're already here." Diane's voice sharpened. "Stay put. I'm coming to you." The call ended. Grant turned to the screen. "This is going to change everything." Lisa's phone buzzed. She checked it, and her face went pale. She turned the screen to them. A new message. "Final warning. Walk away." A chill ran through the room. Outside, the black sedan parked across the street. They weren't just being followed. They were being watched. The truth is ready to be revealed, but will they live long enough to tell it? The tension in the conference room was suffocating. Lisa's hands trembled as she set her phone down, the ominous text message still glowing on the screen. "Final warning. Walk away." Dr. Grant inhaled sharply. "They know exactly where we are." Outside, the black sedan remained parked across the street, its tinted windows impenetrable. Captain Jackson felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't just corporate damage control anymore. Someone was willing to silence them permanently, if necessary. Lisa licked her lips. "What if they're not bluffing?" Grant's expression hardened. "We can't back down. If we stop now, they win, and more people will die." Jackson turned toward the laptop, where the damning flight logs were still displayed. He thought back to every time he had dismissed passenger complaints, every time he had followed orders without question. He had been a willing pawn in the airline system. But not anymore. "Then we finish this," Jackson said, voice steady. "We go live." A knock on the door made them all jump. Lisa exhaled shakily. "Diane?" Jackson moved cautiously, glancing through the peephole before unlocking the door. Diane Walters, the veteran news anchor, stood there, flanked by a cameraman. Her sharp eyes took in their tense faces immediately. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. Jackson stepped aside. "Not a ghost. Just a warning." He gestured to Lisa's phone. Diane read the message, her face tightening. "That means you have something worth fearing. And that means we definitely go live." The cameraman began setting up. Lisa plugged the flight logs into Diane's laptop, and Grant arranged the documents. Within minutes, The makeshift newsroom was ready. Diane clipped on her microphone. We're streaming live to millions of viewers. Once this starts, there's no stopping it. She looked at them. Are you ready? Jackson exhaled. Do it. The red live icon appeared on the screen. Diane turned to the camera, her voice calm but firm. Good evening. This is Diane Walters, reporting from an undisclosed location. We interrupt regular programming with a breaking story, one that the airline industry does not want you to hear. She glanced at Jackson. I am here with Captain Eric Jackson, who until now was a high-ranking pilot for one of the country's biggest airlines. Tonight, he is stepping forward to expose a shocking cover-up, one that has cost passengers their lives. Jackson took a deep breath. This was it. The airline I work for has systematically silenced medical professionals, denied emergency assistance, and buried cases where passengers died unnecessarily, he began. They almost made me the scapegoat for what happened on Flight 387, but the truth is they have been covering up these incidents for years. Diane turned to Lisa. And you were a flight attendant on Flight 387? Lisa nodded. I saw it firsthand. Dr. Grant tried to save a man's life. The captain, under company orders, refused to let him. If not for Dr. Grant, that passenger would be dead. And now, we have proof that this wasn't the first time. Diane turned to the screen behind them, where leaked flight logs filled the monitor. These records show disturbing patterns, multiple cases where black doctors were ignored, where undocumented passengers were denied life-saving treatment, where lawsuits were settled quietly. Then, she addressed the audience directly. And just minutes before this broadcast, our sources received a threat. A warning to walk away. That tells us one thing: the story is bigger than we imagined. Jackson exhaled. It was out now. There was no undoing this. Then bang. The room shook as the building's front door was slammed open. Shouts echoed from the hallway. Heavy boots pounded toward them. Lisa gasped. They're here. Diane didn't flinch. She turned to the camera. Stay with us, America. The truth is out. And they can't stop it now. The screen flickered, then the feed cut to black. The truth is live, but so is the danger. Who just stormed the building, and will they make it out alive? The room exploded into chaos. The heavy thud of boots against the tile floor sent a chill down Lisa's spine. Captain Jackson's instincts kicked in. He moved quickly, positioning himself between the door and Lisa, while Dr. Grant grabbed the laptop, clutching it like a lifeline. Diane Walters remained seated, her expression unshaken even as the door slammed open. 3 men in security uniforms stepped inside, their faces unreadable. But these weren't police. No badges, no official insignias, just plain black uniforms and cold, calculating eyes. Step away from the computer, one of them ordered. Diane leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. You're too late. The broadcast already went live. The whole world knows. The lead guard, a man with a scar running down his cheek, sneered. We're just here to collect company property. His gaze flicked to the laptop in Dr. Grant's hands. Hand it over. Grant's grip tightened. This is evidence. You have no legal right. Jackson moved first. Who sent you? He demanded. The man smirked. Come on, Captain. You know how this works. The company cleans up its messes. Lisa's stomach twisted. They weren't here to talk. Then sirens, red and blue lights, flashed outside the building. The sudden wail of police sirens cut through the night. The men in black froze, exchanging glances. Diane smiled. You see, gentlemen, unlike your bosses, I believe in backups. Every major news station received the flight logs at the same time we went live. And in about 30 seconds, the real authorities will be here. The scarred man's jaw clenched. He lunged toward the laptop. Jackson blocked him. A quick, sharp punch to the gut sent the man stumbling back. Lisa grabbed a chair, swinging it at another guard's legs, knocking him off balance. Grant, never one for violence, simply held onto the laptop and took a step back as Diane continued speaking directly into the hidden backup camera on her desk. America, you're watching this in real time. This is how corporate power operates. When the truth comes out, they send men like these to erase it. The scarred man cursed, realizing he was on camera. Then the police stormed in. Hands in the air, officers barked, weapons drawn. The men in black hesitated for a fraction of a second before raising their hands. They had lost. Jackson exhaled, stepping back as the officers restrained them. Lisa let out a shaking breath, her adrenaline still surging. Dr. Grant finally relaxed his grip on the laptop. It's over. Diane smirked. No, doctor. It's just beginning. The fallout was immediate. The leaked flight logs, combined with Jackson's testimony and Diane's broadcast, set the world on fire. The airline's CEO resigned within hours. Stock prices plummeted. Lawsuits flooded in. Former employees came forward with even more damning stories. And Captain Jackson? He sat before a Senate hearing, the cameras rolling as a congressman asked, "Captain, do you regret following orders for so long?" Jackson met his gaze. "I regret not speaking up sooner." Dr. Grant was there too, not as a victim, but as an expert witness. His voice was clear, unwavering. The airline industry must change. Because what happened on Flight 387 was not an accident. It was a pattern. Lisa? She quit the airline. An advocacy group reached out, offering her a position working to protect passengers' rights. And Walters? She won 3 journalism awards for the story. As for the airline, it never recovered. Months later, Jackson and Grant met for coffee. No cameras. No microphones. "So what's next?" Jackson asked. Grant smiled. "I go back to doing what I love, saving lives." "You?" Jackson chuckled. "I hear pilot training schools need instructors. Might be time to teach the next generation to do better." Grant raised his cup. "To doing better." Jackson clinked his mug against Grant's. The storm was over, but the sky had never looked clearer. The truth always finds a way to rise. What happened on Flight 387 wasn't just about one man, one airline, or one decision. It was about accountability, justice, and the power of speaking up. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, imagine what other hidden truths are out there, waiting to be exposed. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more eye-opening stories, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Because the next big story, it could be yours.